John O'Conor, my goodness, I'm so happy to see you here today. And distant though we are, it feels like you're in my living room. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Laura. It's great to be here. It really is.
So you did us this wonderful, you've given us a gift in lieu of your presence here in person, since we are still not going to be able to gather to make music publicly indoors by April of this year, which would have been your concert with us. You recorded three very beautiful nocturnes, one that is very familiar to most, but two others that may not be. And tell me about these three beautiful little nocturnes that you've recorded for us to share.
These three nocturnes are three of the most beautiful pieces in the repertoire, I think. The fact that John Field is Irish is a special thing for me.
Yes.
Also, when I was in my late teens or early 20s, I remember reading a British lexicon which said that John Field was a pale imitator of Chopin, which got the Irish in me, and I really was very angry about that. So I started researching him a lot more. John Field was born in 1782 in Dublin and was apprenticed to Clementi in London when he was only about 12. Clementi taught him the piano, taught him composition, and Clementi made pianos as well. And he discovered that when John Field demonstrated the pianos, he sold more pianos. So he was going on a European tour selling his pianos. And he brought John Field along, and they went to Paris, and they went to Vienna, and they went to St. Petersburg. And then winter set in. And in those days, when winter set in, you stayed until spring. So they stayed until spring, and Clementi, let's say, was not very generous with the money. But in the meantime, while he was there in winter, the daughter of every single nobleman in St. Petersburg wanted to study piano with this dashing young Irishman. So when spring arrived and Clementi said, "Well, I'm leaving," and John Field said, "Well, I'm not," because he was making a lot of money. And he basically spent the rest of his life living in Russia. He discovered that very quickly he would play after dinner in these noblemen's houses. And after dinner, people didn't necessarily want to listen to long sonatas and variations and fantasies of the 18th century. So he started writing shorter piano pieces, called them romance and pastoral and things like that. And then in 1814, when Chopin was only 4, he composed 3 nocturnes. And it was the first time that anybody had written a nocturne for the piano. And they became the rage of Europe. And people, they loved it so much he had to write more. And his name just, in the days before emails and Instagrams and all these things, his name just shot around the musical world, and he became incredibly famous. So he wrote more nocturnes. And then Chopin was, as I say, was 4 at the time. So when Chopin started composing when he was in his late teens, he started writing nocturnes as well. So that's why I like playing. To me, the most beautiful of the nocturnes I adore it. It's the number 6 in F major, and it's just so beautiful. I mean, the thing about the Field nocturnes is it's very much like a Bellini aria. It's a very, very beautiful melody, very smooth, and it's just so peaceful. And it's a very simple accompaniment, and it's just glorious. And then the Chopin's nocturnes, his earliest one, people have actually said he stole some of Field's ideas. I don't think it's true, but people say this. And it's the E-flat nocturne, which is one of his most famous pieces. And again, it's a absolutely beautiful melody and a very, very simple accompaniment. And you have to realize that in Russia, John Field is credited as being one of the founders of the Russian piano school, which of course has become so famous ever since. And Glinka was one of his students, and Anton Rubinstein in the late 1880s. I mean, he used to tell all his students how John Field used to practice the piano and all the rest of it. So this tradition went on. So when Scriabin started composing the piano and wanted to become one of the most famous pianists in the world, and he was practicing the Liszt sonata and strained his right hand so badly that his doctor said, "You can't use your right hand for a while." So he wrote 2 pieces for the left hand on its own. And this left nocturne is one of them. And that's why I think it's very special. And it's a link between all 3, not just because of the nocturne and Chopin and Scriabin being so alike, but also the John Field connection with Scriabin as well.
Yes. Well, and if you don't know the Scriabin is written for the left hand, you would never know. I mean, it as a listener, you're hearing the full range of the instrument. You're hearing uh, the same amount of it really sounds as
Two hands.
complex as two
I mean,
hands.
I remember when I was a student in Vienna, a great friend of mine, she's from Scotland, and she was just finishing her studies, and she decided to do all the things she hadn't done in her 4 years in Vienna. One of them being was ice skating, where she promptly fell and broke her right wrist. So for the rest of her time in Vienna, she could only explore the left-hand repertoire.
Mhm.
And she was the first person who told me about the Scriabin Nocturne for the left hand. And then a few years later, well, quite a few years later, I was back in Ireland. I was doing a series of television programs on pianos plus, I called it, and it's just sort of explaining classical music to people who mightn't know much about it.
Mhm.
And I did on the Nocturne and the development of the Nocturne. And I played field and I played Chopin. I learned the Scriabin. I did, Barbara Nocturne, not Grieg Nocturne, lots of other nocturnes. But I was practicing the Scriabin Nocturne, and my wife was walking by, and I said, "Does this sound okay?" She said, "It's beautiful. I don't know that piece." And I said, "Does it sound as though I'm playing it with one hand?" And she came in and stood by the piano and said, "Prove it." Thank you.